The iron gates of a Houston estate gleamed beneath the rising Texas sun, its stillness masking the storm within. Camila Santos adjusted her plain uniform before pressing the bell, her palms damp, her heart carrying both hope and fear. At only 26, she had left behind her mother in another state, chasing work that paid enough to keep illness at bay. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. They said Rafael Mendoza was a powerful man, an agribusiness magnate whose fortune stretched across acres of land and countless deals. But no one spoke of the silence that haunted his house, or of his 7-year-old son, Lucas, who hadn't spoken to a stranger in months. When the echo of the bell carried through the mansion's halls, Camila couldn't know it yet. By crossing that threshold, she wasn't just stepping into a job, she was stepping into a story that would rewrite her life forever. The Mendoza mansion stood like a fortress of glass and stone on the outskirts of Houston, its wide lawns trimmed to perfection, guarded by silence as much as by wealth. Inside, however, the air was heavy, not with the scent of flowers from the garden, but with unease. Camila stepped through the doorway after the housekeeper led her in. Her shoes felt too small for the polished marble floors, her presence too ordinary for the cathedral-like ceilings above her. Every sound, the echo of her footsteps, the creak of her cleaning supplies, felt like an intrusion in a world not built for her. From the grand staircase, Rafael Mendoza appeared. He was only 35, but the long days of negotiations, land disputes, and sleepless nights had carved tired shadows beneath his eyes. Dressed casually in a crisp shirt, he still carried the quiet authority of a man who knew the world bent to his will. Yet there was no arrogance in his voice when he spoke, only exhaustion. "My son, Lucas, is 7, he explained, his words carrying the weight of confession. Since his mother left, he has refused to adapt anywhere. We've changed schools 3 times. Doctors talk about anxiety, maybe autism, but mostly, he just hides." As if summoned by the truth, a pair of wide, watchful eyes peeked from behind the living room sofa. Lucas, small, fragile, his dark hair tousled, stared at Camila with the caution of someone who had already learned the world was not safe. Camila lowered herself onto the floor, leaving distance between them. Her voice was soft, steady, carrying warmth instead of pity. "Hi, Lucas. I'm Camila. I'll be around to take care of the house. And maybe make good food." Lucas said nothing. His tiny fingers clutched a toy car, as if it were the only anchor he trusted. Rafael stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unsure whether to expect rejection or a miracle. For a moment, the silence thickened. The house seemed to hold its breath. Camila began tidying up the toys, humming a tune under her breath, weaving little stories as if she were speaking to the air itself. "This red car must be very brave to drive around the house alone," she murmured. A pause. Then, so quietly it almost vanished into the room, Lucas whispered, "He doesn't drive alone, he's scared." It was the first true word he had spoken to a stranger in months. From the doorway, Rafael's chest tightened. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the silence of his home. But while the room remained still, the boy's cautious gaze lingered on Camila. As if somewhere deep inside, he had recognized her long before she even walked through that door. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Camila cleaned, cooked, organized every corner of the mansion. But what truly mattered was the boy who never left her shadow. Lucas trailed her at a distance, silent but present, like a ghost testing the edges of trust. It was at dinner, a week later, that the first test came. Rafael had invited 2 business partners to the house, men in sharp suits who believed wealth made them superior. Men who noticed Camilla only as background. Another servant passing silently through their world. The long oak table gleamed with crystal glasses and polished silver. Camilla moved quietly, refilling water, placing dishes with practiced grace. But Lucas, who usually sat in silence, began to fidget. His small hands trembled over the fork, his lips pressed tight. "Come on, Lucas. Say hello to our guests," one of the men urged, his voice carrying the forced cheer of someone testing an animal at a zoo. Lucas froze. His chest rose and fell quickly, his throat tightening. The men chuckled, shaking their heads. "He still doesn't speak. At his age?" "Shame," whispered the other, not caring that the boy could hear. Raphael's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He had heard it before, from teachers, from relatives, from strangers who thought they knew better. But this time, Camilla's hand stilled as she placed a dish on the table. Her gaze flicked to Lucas, who was shrinking in his chair, disappearing into silence. She knelt beside him, her voice low, carrying the calm of someone who knew storms could be quieted with patience. "It's okay, Lucas. You don't have to speak. Not if you don't want to." Her words were gentle, yet they carried through the room like a challenge, sharp enough to silence the laughter. The two men exchanged smirks, the kind that mocked not just the child, but anyone who dared to protect him. "Let him try," one said, swirling his wine glass. "Or he'll never learn." The boy's shoulders shook, his breath quickening into the edge of panic. Raphael's fists tightened beneath the table, but before he could intervene, Camilla leaned closer to Lucas, her voice barely above a whisper meant only for him. And in that fragile moment, the boy lifted his eyes toward her, the first spark of defiance lighting behind the fear. No one believed he would even try, but the silence that followed spread across the hall like fire. The dining room was heavy with silence, the weight of expectation pressing on the boy's small shoulders. Lucas clutched his fork as if it were a shield, his knuckles pale. The two men waited with cruel curiosity, Raphael with restrained fury. And then, softly, almost too faint to hear, Lucas whispered a single word, "Car." The men blinked, confused, but Camilla smiled as if he had spoken an entire sentence. "A car, yes," she said warmly, her voice flowing like light through a shuttered window. "Your red one, right? The brave one?" Lucas nodded, just barely, his eyes flicking to her for approval. It was the smallest of victories, but in that house, it was thunder. One of the men laughed under his breath. He muttered a toy's name. "That's progress." Raphael shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but Camilla didn't flinch. She stayed focused on the child, her presence steady and safe. Lucas placed his fork down carefully, then turned to whisper again, this time with trembling courage. "He doesn't drive alone." Camilla's eyes softened. "No, he doesn't. He has friends. Like you." The boy exhaled, his small shoulders loosening as if a storm had passed. For the first time, he picked up a bite of food without hesitation. Raphael watched, stunned, as if witnessing a language only Camilla could translate. The partners exchanged glances, dismissive. "Sentimental nonsense," one muttered. "He'll grow out of it, or he won't. But business waits for no child." Raphael said nothing. He couldn't. Not while his throat closed with something dangerously close to gratitude. As the evening dragged on, Camilla cleared the plates, her movements quiet but precise. Lucas followed her to the kitchen, carrying his napkin like a badge of honor. She crouched to meet his eyes, whispering something only he could hear. And the boy, this boy who had been silent for months, smiled. And just when everyone thought he would retreat back into silence, something began to awaken inside him. Something no one in that house had dared to expect. The house, once echoing with silence, began to change in subtle ways. At first, it was only the faint sound of humming drifting from the kitchen as Camilla cooked, the aroma of garlic and fresh herbs softening the cold marble air. But soon, it was something more. The sound of tiny footsteps running across the hall, laughter bubbling up like water breaking through stone. Lucas had begun to follow her everywhere. He helped carry vegetables from the market, his small fingers curling around the handles of paper bags. He sprinkled salt with exaggerated seriousness, waiting for Camilla's approving nod. And in the evenings, when Raphael returned home from long hours in negotiations and boardrooms, he found his son not hiding, not trembling, but talking. "Daddy, we made soup today," Lucas blurted one evening, the words tumbling out like a secret he couldn't keep. Raphael froze in the doorway, his son's voice, clear, unafraid, pierced deeper than any business triumph could. His eyes shifted to Camilla, who stood with her sleeves rolled up, a gentle smile on her lips. She didn't take the credit. She only looked at Lucas as if this had always been inside him, waiting. At the dinner table, Lucas began to describe dreams, wild ones, races with his toy cars, castles made of sand, oceans that glowed in the dark. He even asked questions about the stars, about the maps on Raphael's office wall. For each answer, he looked to Camilla, as though she held the key to whether the world was safe enough to explore. And slowly, the mansion that once felt like a prison began to feel alive again. Raphael watched from the shadows sometimes, leaning against the doorway as Lucas laughed over spilled flour or shouted victory when his toy cars raced across the kitchen tiles. But what struck him most was Camilla's patience. The way she listened as if every word from Lucas mattered, the way she carried quiet dignity in a house where she could have been invisible. For the first time in years, Rafael Mendoza hesitated, not in business, not in contracts or deals, but in the presence of this woman who seemed to hold his fractured world together with nothing but kindness. It wasn't just skill, it was dignity. And suddenly, silence fell across Raphael's guarded heart as he realized that what she brought into his home was far greater than he had ever dared to hope. The storm broke on a Thursday night. Rain lashed against the windows of the Mendoza estate, the kind of storm that made even steel towers in the city tremble. Inside, the dining hall was alive not with warmth, but with confrontation. Raphael's business partners had returned, sharp suits, sharper tongues. They came not just for contracts, but to press their advantage, to remind him of weaknesses they sensed but could not name. Lucas sat frozen at the table, eyes wide, the old silence threatening to return. "The boy is fragile," one of them said coldly. "You can't build empires on fragility. Maybe it's time to consider boarding schools. Specialists. Somewhere he won't interfere with business." The words cut deeper than they realized. Lucas shrank in his chair, his small hands trembling. For a moment, the house was back to what it had been, cold, merciless, suffocating. But then Camilla stepped forward. She had no place at that table, no wealth, no title. Yet her voice carried more strength than the storm outside. "He is not fragile. He is brave." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "He speaks now," Camilla continued, her eyes fierce. "He plays, he dreams, he asks questions. That is not weakness. That is strength. And if you cannot see it, then it is not the boy who is blind." Lucas's eyes widened, his chest rising and falling as if her words gave him breath. He turned to his father, hesitant, trembling, and whispered with all the courage he had, "Don't send me away." The room froze. Raphael's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. He rose slowly, his chair scraping against the marble. His voice was steady, but filled with a fire his partners had never heard before. "My son stays here. in this house. With me, with her. Camilla blinked, startled. The partners shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had overstepped. But it was too late. The decision was made. Raphael had drawn the line, not as a businessman, but as a father. And Lucas, silent, broken Lucas, smiled. As thunder rolled across the city, Raphael knew this was more than defiance. It was the beginning of something that could change not just his son's future, but his own heart as well. Morning broke softly over Manhattan. The storm of the night before leaving the city washed clean. But inside the Mendoza estate, the air was sharper, clearer, as if the house itself had been waiting for this moment. Raphael stood at the head of the long dining table, no partners around him now, only silence and the faint sound of clinking dishes as Camilla served breakfast. Lucas sat in his chair, upright, his eyes no longer hidden in shadow. He took a bite, swallowed, and then whispered, not to Camilla, not in fear, but directly to his father. "Good morning." The words were small, but they thundered in Raphael's chest. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. The door opened briefly, one of his partners from the night before stepping inside with a folder of contracts. But when he saw the scene, the boy speaking, the maid smiling, Raphael transformed, he hesitated. Raphael didn't let him linger. "Business waits," Raphael said firmly, closing the folder with one hand. "My son does not." The man left, unsettled, and Raphael turned back to Lucas. For the first time, he noticed how much of himself was in the boy, the same sharp eyes, the same stubborn jaw. He had almost lost it all by refusing to see. Camilla began to clear the plates, but Raphael stopped her. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a check folded neatly, and placed it on the table. "This was your salary," he said, "but no amount of money can measure what you've done here." Camilla froze, unsure if this meant dismissal. Her heart raced, but then Raphael spoke again, softer. "You don't work for me anymore. You belong with us." Her breath caught, her hands trembling as Lucas ran to her side, hugging her tightly. She looked at Raphael, and for the first time, he wasn't the untouchable millionaire. He was a man, vulnerable and grateful. The storm had passed. What remained was fragile but real, a family, born not of wealth, but of courage and quiet dignity. And as Camilla walked out of that dining room with Lucas's hand in hers, Raphael followed behind, knowing that in this house, laughter would never again be cruel and silence would never again be feared. Weeks later, the Mendoza estate no longer echoed with cold formality. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still glowed, but the house itself seemed alive again. Laughter drifted through the halls, footsteps no longer rushed but free. Lucas now spoke daily, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. His words were not many, but each one was a victory. He drew pictures with bold colors, read aloud with Camilla's patient guidance, and once even looked his father in the eye to say, "I'm not afraid anymore." Those words were worth more than any contract Raphael had ever signed. In the city, whispers spread among business circles. Some mocked him for allowing sentiment to interfere with power, but others saw something different. A man who had been humbled and remade, whose strength no longer came from arrogance but from love. Deals began to shift, alliances reshaped. Quietly, Raphael's decision to stand by his son and the maid who had changed them both became legend among those who thought wealth meant invulnerability. One evening, as the sun painted the skyline in shades of fire, Raphael stood on the balcony with Camilla and Lucas. The boy leaned against his father. The city stretched endlessly before them. Camilla spoke softly. "The world won't understand what happened here, but it doesn't have to." Raphael nodded, his voice steady. "Let them chase power. We found something greater. And in that moment, the city of steel and glass below seemed smaller, less imposing. For what they held was not measured in towers or fortune, but in the fragile, unbreakable bond of a family that had almost never been. In a nation that often mistakes silence for weakness, a child's whispered words, and the courage of those who listened, proved that dignity can rewrite destiny.